Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, January 26, 2024. This week's Chairman's Report is guest written by Randy Fischer, an Americans for Fair Taxation board member. Morality and the fair tax. Currently, when the United States is fixated on having the moral high ground, the concept of morality is worth exploring as it relates to the fair tax. Now, of course, many astute U.S. citizens are keenly aware of the hypocrisy and double standard that many who claim moral superiority often exhibit. Nonetheless, let's dive into what a moral system of taxation looks like using a nonpartisan, straightforward, and common sense approach. Now, although numerous other adjectives could be used to describe what moral means to us, most of us would likely agree that it encompasses all or some combination of the following traits: fair and principled, equitable, just, right, honest, proper, and ethical. Now, although without an ultimate cornerstone to measure one's morality against, the concept of morality only precariously holds together in a secular context. However, let's dive into this with that lens. First, our society today focuses a great deal on diversity and inclusivity as a backbone of fairness. The fair tax treats everyone absolutely the same, regardless of skin color, race, sex, or any other differentiating factor. For example, the income tax provides extensive deductions, exclusions, credits, and loopholes that favor groups such as homeowners, arguably the wealthiest among us, who receive a significant reduction in their federal tax obligation via the home mortgage interest deduction. The fair tax charges the same flat rate to everyone. Now, the income tax continues to favor groups that can make large political donations and or hire expensive lobbyists to twist the nearly 90,000 pages of statutes, rules, and regulations to their favor. Diversity and inclusion? Check. Equitable? Check. The fair tax is also estimated to reduce the annual tax gap by 90%, $100 billion annual illegal evasion compared to the current $1 trillion. A remarkable fair tax characteristic is that it does not stir up our darkest human tendency of jealousness and covetousness, meaning the fair tax only taxes what we individually choose to purchase beyond our basic needs. The ideas of punishment if you're more successful, stifling and motivation-stunting assistance to those who are less successful, and favor for the industry or political flavor of the day all melt away under the fair tax. The income tax creates a psychological environment where we are not only envious of our fellow citizens and wish a higher income tax rate on those who are wealthier, but where we despise the IRS for seizing our hard-earned income before we even see it in our bank account. This creates an environment where evading the income tax seems like the prudent, or in some cases even the moral, thing to do. Today, the vast majority of retail sales are handled by point-of-sale software. These systems are already collecting state sales taxes and can be easily updated to collect the fair tax as well. Now, good luck telling the Walmart sales associate or Amazon online platform that you're just not interested in paying the fair tax today. That's just not going to work. Just and right, honest and ethical. Check. Let's think inclusivity. The income tax, as well as the payroll tax, and I'm talking about those FICA and Medicare taxes that all wage earners pay at the same rate, they are regressive relative to the fair tax. One must look at the actual math here because one's first impulse will be to think that the flat rate fair tax can't possibly be as progressive as a graduated rate income tax. Now, here's what changes that math equation and objectively proves that the fair tax is the more progressive, aka fairer, tax system. It's just two things. First, the income and payroll tax system includes the aforementioned regressive payroll tax that's responsible for nearly 40% of the U.S. Treasury receipts. This means that nearly half of U.S. taxes collected are done on the backs of employees, including the working poor. Since these taxes are withheld from a worker's paycheck before the worker even sees it, everyone working for a paycheck is having to pay the government before they provide for their family's basic needs. Now, the ultra-rich people living on investments and capital gains don't pay this regressive payroll tax. Second, the fair tax undoes this injustice by ensuring that no legal U.S. resident pays the fair tax on the purchase of the basic necessities they need to survive. The prebate ensures this with a direct deposit to legal residents' bank accounts each month, effectively reimbursing them up front for the fair tax they'll pay on life's necessities. Since you don't pay a dime of fair tax out of your own pocket until you've provided for your basic needs, you feed your family before you feed the government with the fair tax. Oh, and if freedom is a characteristic of morality, each person, not the government, decides what their basic necessities are, be it milk, mayonnaise, bananas, or beer. Again, politics aside and looking at this through a pragmatic common sense lens, one would be hard-pressed to say that the fair tax is not honest, just, proper, and ethical in this respect. Inclusivity? Check again. Honest, just, right? Well, you get the picture here, folks. Now, switching gears a minute, let's think about America relative to the rest of the world. Our politicians have an obligation to protect and look out for us as U.S. citizens, as well as American businesses and other interests. The current income payroll tax system results in embedded taxes totaling anywhere from 15 to 25% of the total cost of our U.S.-made products or services, depending on the industry. This means that when we sell American-made goods abroad, we put our U.S. businesses at a disadvantage right out of the gate relative to other countries selling the same product or service. This is not equitable, not fair, and not just. The fair tax creates a system where no income or payroll tax exists. Therefore, these significant embedded current costs fall out of the cost of manufacturing our U.S. products and providing our U.S. services. This finally creates a level playing field where our U.S. widgets can fairly compete with the widgets produced elsewhere based on quality, craftsmanship, customer sentiment, rather than being at a 20% cost disadvantage on day one. Now think about the many countries in Europe that have extensive VAT taxes built into each stage of their widgets production. When sold abroad, these taxes are refunded to the exporting country's companies, taking the taxes out of the product's costs. Such a refund is impossible for American companies given the insidious way that tax costs are invisibly embedded into every product's overall costs. Since the fair tax applies only to retail sales to the final consumer, there are no embedded tax costs in the prices of American products produced for export. American companies can finally compete on a level playing field. Finally, we will treat our businesses, large and small alike, equitably. Fair, equitable, just, and on we go. The virtues of the fair tax could go on for many more pages, but the above is a good start. Given these basic characteristics of the fair tax relative to our current system, the fair tax wins on the morality question in a landslide without the hypocritical baggage. In conclusion, Randy clearly shows why the fair tax is the superior solution. The choice is easy. Do we want a system for funding the federal government that is so simple everyone can understand it, that shows the cost of the federal government on every retail receipt so all of us will understand what we're paying, that helps U.S. companies compete with foreign competitors, that keeps jobs in the United States rather than exporting them to other countries, that permanently establishes the solvency of Social Security and Medicare, and is the largest transfer of power from D.C. to the people since the Constitution was adopted? Now, D.C. is ignoring the one real solution that allows us to remain citizens and not subjects, the fair tax. The fair tax is simple, it's non-invasive, but most of all, it works. The solution? Pass the fair tax. Now, if you don't like the idea of the IRS and D.C. requiring you to reveal more and more of your private financial data and changing us from citizens to subjects, you should be helping us pass the fair tax. Under the fair tax, there are no more tax returns. You no longer have to disclose your personal financial information to the government. Banks and other financial institutions no longer have to tell the government about the dividends and interest you received or about how much you made trading stocks, bonds, and other capital assets. With a fair tax, there is no need for the government to know anything about your IRA because you won't need an IRA. The fair tax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. And of course, if the government doesn't have your confidential financial data, they can't leak it. In addition to solving the confidentiality problem, the fair tax lets business owners concentrate on making their businesses more profitable and beneficial for their shareholders and employees. President Biden and Congress, Pass the fair tax. Do the right thing for the American people and fix the broken income payroll tax system. You can go down in history as the ones who freed all present and future Americans from the tyranny of the income payroll tax system. You can ensure that there can be no more leaks of our confidential information and transfer power back to the American people over how much tax they pay. The fair tax transfers power from Congress and the bureaucrats to the people. We, not D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay. And with the fair tax, there is no IRS. The states collect the fair tax. And only retail businesses will have to collect the fair tax and remit it to the government. Since less than 10% of the retailers account for 90% of retail purchases, there will be much less opportunity for evasion. So why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up this almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Now, there's going to be a vote on the fair tax in the House of Representatives. We now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the present income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the fair tax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or they can pass the fair tax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the fair tax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the fair tax needs to be amended to address a problem, then they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed. Please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the fair tax. The fair tax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the fair tax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The fair tax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the fair tax. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the fair tax. Take back control. Help us pass the fair tax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org and invest in AFFT. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.